my sense is that we're going to have a lot of challenges with the mind over the coming years, because there's going to be so much change. When there's a lot of change, it's the mind that gets most challenged by that. The heart and the awareness and the consciousness can actually absorb change really well. It's what we're made out of. Energy is constantly changing. But the mind is the repository, in a way, of all the old stuff, what we're used to, what we've known before. And therefore, it's the bit that's being replaced all the time. And the bit that's being replaced, the older bit, is the slower, more static bit. So it feels to us like it doesn't want to go away. So it feels like it causes trouble because of that. So we need to cultivate mental flexibility and mental resilience and the strength to be able to work with your mind, not fight against it, because when you fight against your mind, it makes it stronger. It makes it fight back. Just like a human being, if you fight with your partner or you fight with your kids, fighting becomes the way of doing things. It becomes the way of being in the house, and it doesn't produce solutions. Even I remember so much from when I was young, there was always this constant kind of intellectual, not fighting, just intellectual positioning all the time. And you get this in a lot of dinner parties and in certain relatively intellectual circles, where you have these very stimulating conversations, but actually what's happening all the time is everyone's just positioning themselves with their stories or their knowledge. It's like, well, I know this and I know that, and I can tell you another story that beats that story or positions something around that story. And it's kind of interesting and it sucks you in. But in fact, it's like a rather subtle, clever fight going on all the time for really who's the cleverest, who's the most intelligent person, who's the most well-read. And whilst it can be interesting, it's not creative. If you think that your conversation is creating reality, all you're creating there is repetition of knowledge over and over again. And it doesn't nourish, it doesn't give you very much. It doesn't create satisfaction. And I find that when people have done more energy work, they start to find those kinds of conversations really boring, because you suddenly realize, oh my goodness, everyone's just sitting around and competing. It's an ego competition, basically, to see who's right, or it's a competition for dominance. And that's the way that the mind tends to operate. So a very fundamental thing to be able to do is to be able to observe your mind. And I remember one person, when I first talked about that, I made a little 3-minute activation about it. And he said, I can't get this, Sarah. You're doing my mind in. He couldn't even imagine that he could observe his mind, because he was so identified with his mind that he didn't have any sense that it wasn't him and his finest asset. But when you do mindfulness meditation, that's what you're learning essentially, is to be able to observe your mind, be the witness to your own mind, also to your body, to your energy, to your feelings. So that witnessing position is a very powerful position, because it instantly shows you that you're not your mind. And it enables you to get perspective if the mind is feeling out of control, which it can do at times. And especially if emotion is coming up very strongly, the mind is always out of control at that point. You need to be able to stand back and observe. And when you are observing, when you're in that position of observing, notice how the you feels, if that's the right word, the you that is actually observing. Because you'll notice that that you that does the observing never gets caught up in that drama. It never gets hooked up in the stories of the mind. It's very dispassionate in a way, not cold, but just present and simple and clear. And it's more like a container. It like all of that stuff really doesn't have any effect on it. It's very important to be aware that there's this you who's the witness, and you can identify with that witness at any time. You don't have to. We don't necessarily want to be like that all the time. But to be able to observe whenever you need to is really powerful, because it puts things into perspective. And then the other things that make most difference with the mind, and these are all things that I've learned from working with people who are really troubled in their minds and whose minds are an absolute minefield, because they control them, they dominate them, they make them feel absolutely miserable. But we all have minds that are more or less doing that. But if we're healthy, they don't do it enough to disturb. If you get unhealthy, and especially if you get mentally or emotionally unhealthy, your mind can play absolute havoc in your life. And remember that kind of mental unhealthiness is a kind of thing that can hit you every now and then, just like a physical unhealthiness. You can get a cold or you can get flu. Even if you're a very healthy person, a cold or a flu or something like that can be cleaning out something that is difficult to clean out. You can also have bouts of feeling very disturbed in your mind, very emotionally turbulent. So you can also there are certain kinds of cleaning, especially more spiritual cleaning, the deeper cleaning, where you can feel like you're going mad. So it's useful to know all of this stuff. It's really relevant for everybody. So, sometimes when things are clearing out, and I found, especially when it's more of the spiritual stuff, that's where you question, like, oh my goodness, am I going mad? If you have the ability to observe yourself, you know that you're not. But when you step into the experience of your mind and your emotions, you really feel like you're going mad, and you don't know what's up and what's down and what's left and what's right anymore. And so it's useful to be aware of that. It might happen sometime. It's a good thing. It means that you're growing. It's not going to stay there for very long, because hopefully you'll know that it's cleaning. But because it affects your mind and your emotions so strongly, it doesn't feel like it's cleaning. It feels like it's true. Because we have so identified with our minds, we feel that everything that happens in our mind is true. True with a capital T. And that's the grand illusion, if you like, that everything that goes on in the mind is true. That is certainly not true. And as I say many times, the mind doesn't have the ability to discern truth. It can express truth to a certain extent. If you use your awareness, all your subtle senses, to discern what's true, to find what's true and what's not true, you can express that with your mind. The mind is a bit limited in its expression. It often can't express entirely accurately, but it's extremely useful for crystallizing thoughts and for expressing them in a way that's communicable. And very often, because people are very sensitive, when you express things in words, nice, clear words that have been defined and put together by the mind, other people will then feel the resonance behind the words. So this is why it's so powerful to have your mind aligned with all of the rest of you, aligned with your spirit, aligned with your consciousness. Because when your mind expresses in words what your being, your consciousness, your awareness is experiencing, there is a clarity of transmission that comes through that's really powerful. And so you say simple things to people and they get a much richer meaning. But when your mind is not aligned with everything else, when it's playing tricks on you and it's all over the show, And it feels like it's very out of control. Whatever you communicate will not be aligned with that bigger part of you. And then what will happen is that people will feel very confused because the words that you're communicating are packaging up a very different kind of energy. So you say, for example, I'm fine, but you actually don't feel fine at all. And people will know that because they can feel the energy and they can hear the words, and they know exactly when that's not true, although they don't always know what to do with it, because if the words that you've chosen to select and share are I'm fine, what you're saying is I'm desperately trying to keep control of the situation here. That's the inner message of I'm fine. It's great. The inner message is I don't really want you to know what's going on in my life. I'm trying to keep control of things. So please don't touch me. Don't come anywhere near me. Don't pry. Don't ask questions. Leave me alone. That's the subtle message that gets wrapped up in it. It's like, I'm going to give you this tiny little bit of what's going on so that I can hide all the rest. You don't hide it because we are energetic beings, and a lot of people are very sensitive and they can feel all of it. But that language, that communication is often used to control the other person. And that creates for very poor communication. And that goes for with your kids, your partner, your team, anybody who you're talking with. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have some tricks up your sleeve for being able to tame your mind, so to speak, because it will play absolute havoc otherwise. Especially if you try to fight it, it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger. When you allow them to be expressed, not taking them on as it's all of me, because it never is, but actually communicating them with as you. Those thoughts of, I can't do this anymore, I want to end it all. If you agree with them, yeah, you do. I understand. I had somebody do that yesterday. I said, he said, I'm thinking about dying and ending it all the time. I can't stop. And I said, there is a part of you that is dying. Go and listen to it, talk to it. And he sent me an email of the conversation, and it brought tears to my eyes, because there was this dialogue going on, and he said, I see that you want to end it all. And this part said, yes. And then he said, I'm a little bit afraid of that. I think maybe we're rather attached to each other. And this part said, yes, I need you. I want to end it all, but I want to hold on to you. I'm afraid of dying. And he said, yeah, I'm a bit afraid of you leaving me as well. And it went on like this. It was this sweet conversation between two parts of the same person that had become too attached to each other, and recognizing that they'd become too attached. He said, I realize that I've become too attached to you and that I really don't need you anymore. And this part said, yeah, that's true, but I'm so used to being here. I'm a part of you. And he said, you know what, I'm going to give you permission to leave. And this part says, well, I don't know how to leave. How do I do that? And so he turns to his higher self and he says, how do I help that part to leave? All in the dialogue, all written down, and his higher self tells him what to do. And then, because he's been able to observe all of this, he says in the email, I can see that part of me that I'm holding on to is like a huge ball of, it's like a seething mass of darkness and misery. And I've been holding on to it for far too long. And it's now I know that he will just be in the process of letting go of it. Suddenly, finally, he could see it for what it is. So if you can just talk with your mind and listen like you would with a small child who needs some attention. Listen when your mind says, I really messed that up. And don't say, no, you didn't. It was all right. It's okay. You'll be able to do it another time. But say, yes, you did. Yeah, I get it. It's so powerful. Because the chances are, if you came away feeling you really messed it up, maybe a part of it you did. Maybe a part of you didn't. Like, you know, the child maybe thinks that there's this terrible thing going on. But if you just listen, it's like, yeah, okay, you think you messed it up. Then you can have the conversation even, should we actually go and have a look and see if you messed it up? And you might find when you go and have a look that you really did mess it up. It's like, oh, didn't do that very well. And then instead of saying, oh, but you're awesome, it's okay, you can do it. It's like, yeah, that's true. I actually didn't do it very well. Okay, I'll be able to do it better next time. But because when you do that I'm awesome thing, you don't look at the facts. You don't actually see whether you did something well or not. You go into denial, and then you can't improve very easily. Then you spend a very long time defending yourself. And if you can look at it and say, actually, that was quite good. That's what I do. Often when I write something, when I write it, it feels really good. And I read it back, it's like, yeah, that's pretty good. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I look at it and think, oh, that's awful. And other people really like it. It's funny. But sometimes I look at it, it's like, yeah, that feels really good. And then I put it away or I publish it. And then my mind starts to tell me it's really bad. And I get sometimes like, I don't even want to go and have a look anymore because I think it's so bad. And when I go back to it and look at it, it's like, wow, that's really good. That happens to me really often if I let my mind get out of control with things that I've published before. The automatic tendency is to think they're crap. And I have to go and look at it. Now, it could be the other way around. And sometimes I do something that I think really isn't very good. And it's interesting. I often get really good feedback on the things that I didn't think were really good. And the point about this is when you can be honest, you can actually find these things out. And it starts to disassociate you from the power of the mind because you don't really take any of it very seriously. You realize that when it thinks things are really bad, sometimes they're actually good. When it thinks things are really good, sometimes they're actually not really good. Sometimes when it thinks things are really bad, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And you start to establish your own discernment. And you then have power. You hold the seat of power then. You have sovereignty, so to speak. You haven't given the power to your mind. And that's the important thing, because that's when things all fall into the right place.